Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast Livestream. It's great to have you here with us. Wednesday, the last Wednesday in August 2023 is rapidly disappearing, right? So it's great to have you here with us today. You've been with us. Many of you have been with us throughout the year and really throughout the beginning since the very launch of the Watchman Newscast here on YouTube. So welcome back. And to all of our new viewers, welcome. We hope that you like what you hear today. I want to start today, though, before we dig into all the latest news, with news right here in the United States where I'm sitting right now. A pretty horrific hurricane is slamming Florida and Georgia right now. I know we've got viewers from Florida and Georgia from around the world, including those two states. Hey, God bless all of you. We're thinking about you right now. We're praying for you, your families, for your safety, for security. For everyone in Florida and Georgia right now, and anyone in the path of this hurricane. Adalia is the name of it. Pretty nasty. Came ashore today as a Category 2 storm. Pretty nasty. It may have come ashore as Category 3, and now it's Category 2, maybe downgraded to a 1, but nasty business for sure. So we're praying for everyone who's been affected, who's in the path. We're praying God's hedge of protection over everyone. And this hurricane goes out to sea in Jesus' name. So join me, please, in prayer for that. And we've got so many victims of natural disasters here over the past few weeks here in the United States. Maui, of course, still praying for everyone there. California, last week, tropical storm hitting California, wildfires in the Pacific Northwest. Then you go to Canada, Greece, also wildfires. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. But folks, a lot going on in these Bible times in which we are living right now. Let's dig into it. Speaking of which, we talked last week on the live stream about Saudi Arabia and Israel and a potential peace treaty between those two nations. And one of the big hooks to the newscast last week was persistent chatter that the Saudis could assume a role on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem as part of this peace deal with Israel, a normalization of relations. If folks really think about it, even 10 years ago, this would have been absolutely unthinkable. Maybe even 5 years ago. Look, the Abraham Accords were signed 3 years ago, August 2020, between Israel, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates. Say 2018, I would have said peace between Israel and the Saudis, a formalized peace. No way, not happening. And yet here we are today, where the chatter is at a fever pitch right now that the two sides are moving towards a deal. Now, when I say moving towards a deal, does that mean this week? No. But does it mean perhaps by the 2024 election, November 2024? Yes. And we discussed this last week. The Biden administration is really in the middle of all of this and trying to broker this deal. And, of course, demanding reportedly concessions from Israel, not from Saudi Arabia, not from the Palestinians, but from Israel, of course. So the Biden administration sees this as a golden opportunity to squeeze concessions out of the world's one and only Jewish state, including, if they had their way, the establishment of a Palestinian state. I don't think that's happening under this current Israeli government led by Benjamin Netanyahu for sure. But the Biden administration sees a golden opportunity here, whereas the Saudis are looking at it as, hey, this will be a blessing to us. We see how Israel's peace treaties with Bahrain and the UAE are blessing those countries, Morocco. We want some of that. Israel is a high-tech, innovation, financial, economic powerhouse. Israel is the strongest military, or boasts the strongest military in the Middle East. And the Saudis are saying it makes sense under Mohammed bin Salman, this young new Saudi prince who's essentially running the country now. Okay, we discussed all of that last week. We'll talk about the Temple Mount some more, by the way, folks. An Israeli columnist, commentator, a friend of mine, Mordecai Kedar, Dr. Mordecai Kedar, wrote a very informative column in the Jerusalem Post published today. I want to quote from it. And he says, under any deal, whatever happens, the Saudis should have no role whatsoever on the Temple Mount. Not only that, Mordecai Kedar writes that Jordan, the Palestinians, no one should have an administrative role over the Temple Mount other than Israel. He says, yes, Muslims can pray there at their sites, Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's not what he's saying. But he's saying they should not be running the place, essentially, like Jordan's religious authorities are right now. We're going to dig into that more. I want to quote directly from his article and get your thoughts on it. Just to throw it out there right now, folks, remember, we'll do a Q&A at the end of this live stream. Just to throw it out there right now, how do you feel? And we asked this last week as well. How do you feel about the possibility of Israel and the Saudis coming to the peace table? How do you feel about that? What do you think? Do you think there's prophetic implications there? I do. I don't see the Saudis playing a nefarious role in that regard, in that when I look at, just to throw it out there, we talk about this a lot, but when I look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, the book of Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39, which lays out this latter days war, the war of Gog and Magog, I don't see Saudi Arabia named there. I do believe when Ezekiel names Sheba and Dedan, funny names, I know, but these were the ancient names essentially for the Arabian Peninsula and that whole area where Saudi Arabia is. Ezekiel says, with God speaking through him, inspired, says that Sheba and Dedan, they watch this invasion of Israel unfold in, quote, the latter days, and they protest and they say, why are you doing this? But they don't directly intervene. So number one, I think in that scenario, the Saudis aren't on the wrong side of the ledger. It doesn't seem. And number two, they actually protest the invasion. Now, the other piece to that is they don't get involved to help Israel. It would appear if you read Ezekiel, and I encourage you again, Ezekiel 38 and 39, read it through. And also the merchants of Tarshish, pardon me, and the young lions thereof, Ezekiel talks about. Many think that's Britain, Western Europe, perhaps even the United States. They also protest this invasion, but they don't get involved. Israel is alone, except for the ultimate ally, and then some, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Israel is never really alone, and God intervenes in a mighty way, to say the least, that puts the world on notice and then some. But what is clear to me is no one's riding to Israel's rescue or coming to Israel's aid in a physical sense, no nation state. It's going to be God who intervenes again in a way that we haven't seen in our lifetime. So fasten your seatbelt for that. But in the meantime, that's my take on the Saudis prophetically in the short term. I don't believe a Saudi-Israel peace deal would be that 7-year treaty mentioned in the book of Revelation. Precursor, perhaps, but not the deal. So we'll talk more about that. I want to get your thoughts now. We've already got a few thousand people with us. We'll have many more before we finish here. We got people from around the world joining us. Welcome, everyone. Man, I see people debating the weather, whether they like the hot or the cold. Okay. But on our chat, but I'm more of a warm weather guy myself. As I get older, I don't know about you guys now that I'm getting old, but I feel the cold more. I sound like I know I sound like an old guy, complaining, but honestly, it just cuts through me sometimes. And I will say, some of the coldest days, you're not gonna believe this, of my life occurred in, surprise, surprise, Israel. That's right. Look, I've grown up on the East Coast of the United States my entire life. It gets cold in the wintertime. You get snow, no doubt. Everyone knows. But in Israel, it was kind of different kind of cold. Number one, in the beginning, I wasn't equipped for it. I said, well, I'm going to the Middle East. I don't even need a jacket. Well, I learned quickly that Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria get very chilly. The Golan, the Lebanon border up in that region. But I can think of 2 times, and then I'll move on, I promise. But just so you know, if you've never been to Israel, that it does get chilly in the wintertime for certain. One time was actually in late April. I believe it was 2017, 2018. I was at Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Museum, for a Holocaust memorial event. It was an outdoor event. Prime Minister Netanyahu was speaking, and folks, I could not get warm. And it was late April. It was just, the wind was relentless. I guess kind of fitting, right? You're at Yad Vashem, a solemn place. It's windy and kind of, I don't know, it's not bleak there, but that night it certainly was. And my good buddy Chris Mitchell from CBN News and I were huddled together, had a big blanket, and we were bundled up. Man, it was just so cold. It was cutting through me. And then the other time was in Samaria at Joshua's altar, which is an incredible biblical site. But man, oh man, we were filming there, and it was so darn cold, folks. And it was one of those productions where I'm like, I don't want to leave. On one hand, I don't want to leave this place. This is amazing. I'm at Joshua's altar. But on the other hand, man, I got to get in the car and put the heat on because it's freezing. And it was one of those productions where it wouldn't end. I'm interviewing a few folks, and I think we're wrapping up. And then the guy says, and then another thing. And I have one more thing to add. I'm like, oh, Lord, help me, because I was an ice cube at that point. But anyway, two of the coldest days of my life, I think, were in those two instances in Israel. I just remember shivering and shuddering. Anyway, a little humor break there, but in all seriousness, when we're talking about this Israel-Saudi peace deal, you saw the title of this live stream, Iran. We didn't get into this last week. What does Iran think? And I see our trusty producer, Daniel, just posted prayers for our friends in Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina affected by Hurricane Adalia right now. No doubt, folks. Keep them in prayer. We have many prayer warriors here on the Watchman Newscast live stream. So keep it up. Keep it coming. But what does Iran think of Israel and Saudi Arabia striking a peace deal? Is Iran just going to sit there and kind of take this and watch it unfold and not say anything, not express? The Iranian regime is not going to express its disgust. What do you think? Do you think Iran is going to stand pat? Let me know. Comment on that as well. Now we're throwing out the comments. And someone says the cold, Randall Mitchell comments, the cold makes you appreciate the warm. I agree. I agree. I think I've become warm-blooded all the time I've spent in Israel, too, in the summertime and in the spring. It does get cold in the winter, though. Not in Tel Aviv, not in Galilee, but Jerusalem, my favorite place on earth. It gets cold in the winter. But what does Iran think? Look, a few things to keep in mind here. And why do I say that the title of this live stream, would Israel-Saudi peace deal mean war with Iran and its proxies? You might say, hey, I thought we were talking peace. This is a good thing. But look, a few things here to unpack, folks. Number one, back in March 2023, remember, we've talked about this on the newscast, Iran and Saudi Arabia normalized relations. It was a deal brokered by China, the communist regime in Beijing. They hadn't had relations in, I believe, 6 years, 6 or 7. No relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Very, very tense. Then all of a sudden, seemingly out of the blue, it was on a Friday afternoon. We have this press conference, and we have the foreign minister of China with officials from Saudi Arabia and Iran. They're announcing they've normalized relations. Now, there were major, major red flags around that. A lot of our viewers were commenting and saying, whoa, what is going on here? Because if you remember, September 2019, Iran actually attacked Saudi Arabia, a hybrid attack with missiles and drones attacking a Saudi oil facility. That was a very big deal. And also Iran for years was funding and arming the Houthis in Yemen, who were also attacking Saudi Arabia. And then just in general, Iran's march towards a nuclear bomb, its proxies like Hezbollah, Shia militias encircling Saudi Arabia, not just Israel, also in a sense encircling Saudi Arabia. Add it all up, folks, you had a very tense situation, no diplomatic relations. Then they announced they're reestablishing ties, and red flags here on the channel, all of our loyal viewers, and everyone was saying, hey, this is not good. This is prophetic. Israel's in trouble. They're going to unite against Israel. I said from the beginning, I don't think that's the case. I think from the Saudis' point of view, folks, I've called it a non-aggression pact, meaning Saudi Arabia felt, and we talked about this last week, but just real quick, if you weren't with us, give me 1 minute to reiterate why I say that. The Saudis felt like they had their backs against the wall. They looked at the United States. The current administration in D.C. is actually hostile to the Saudis, the Biden administration, and it's a mess. And it's weak in the foreign policy realm, obviously. After Afghanistan 2 years ago, that disastrous withdrawal, everyone took notice. That's number one. Number two, the Saudis looked at Israel and said, Israel's the strong horse in the region, the strongest military in the region. But Israel right now, a lot of internal discord. What's going to happen there? Will Bibi still be the prime minister going forward? Or will a more left-wing government take control in Israel? It's not as strong. So the Saudis had questions there as well. And they're staring across the Persian Gulf at the Iranian regime, which is rapidly driving for the bomb. So it wasn't a case of if you can't beat them, join them. on the Saudis' behalf. But what it was bad English there, I know. Hey, basically, we won't stir things up against you. You don't stir things up against us. Let's have a non-aggression pact, essentially. They didn't call it that, but I'm calling it that. You're not attacking us. We're not attacking you. You're not funding the Houthis and supporting the Houthis to attack us. And we're not making waves for you, Iran. Folks, make no mistake about it. The Saudi royal family, I'm sorry, negotiated that deal, or China did, I should say, out of a position of weakness. I think it's pretty clear. The Saudis made this move out of a position not of strength, but of weakness. Feeling beleaguered, feeling abandoned, feeling all alone, seeing Iran growing in power, menacing. It was a position of weakness, I think, no doubt. Whereas Iran, kind of a flex for the Iranian regime, right? They're doing it out of a position of strength in their view. They say, look, we'll make peace with them. And that makes it easier for us to have a foothold in Saudi Arabia, where, folks, make no mistake about it, again, Mecca and Medina, the two holiest sites in Islam, obviously in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi royal family are the custodians of those two sites. Iran would love to control those sites, or at least to have more boots on the ground in Saudi Arabia, and just ways to kind of ingratiate themselves more and more in that country, which, again, it's the birthplace of Islam. It's the birthplace of Islam's prophet, Muhammad. So Saudi Arabia is a very, very major player in the Islamic world with great symbolism. And Iran sees itself, remember, folks, the Iranian regime, as the leader of the Islamic world, or they at least aspire to be that. Now, tough haul, they've alienated half of the Sunni Islamic world, obviously, or most of the Sunni Muslim world. So a tough road to hoe for the Iranian regime. And yet, if suddenly Iran acquires the bomb, then maybe some nations kind of fall in line. And you see more, not only non-aggression pacts, but peace treaties and the like with the Iranian regime. If Iran is in a strong position, nuclear armed, you'll have two things. Number one, probably more nations, Sunni Arab nations included, trying to make peace with Iran. And number two, at the same time, those same nations going into overdrive with their own nuclear programs. And folks, what you would have if you have a nuclear Iran is a nuclear arms race in the world's most volatile and chaotic region. So if you thought the Middle East was crazy and kind of a mess right now, wait till you see a nuclear Iran spark a nuclear arms race. I don't believe we're getting there. I believe Israel will act first, and we'll talk more about that before the hour's up. But that's some of the backdrop for you. So the Saudis have these diplomatic relations now with Iran. And at the time, I have to say, and we openly raised this question here in the newscast, we said, okay, there's been all this chatter and talk. And look, folks, I interviewed Prime Minister Netanyahu back in December, and he talked a bunch about the potential of an Israeli peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. And then all of a sudden, out of left field, the Saudis, who supposedly were very close to having peace with Israel, are making peace with Israel's greatest enemy, the Iranian regime. So it threw everyone for a loop. But contacts, people I trust on the ground in Israel, said, look, right away I made the calls. Guys, what's going on? What do you think of this? They said, look, this does not cancel out the possibility of an Israeli-Saudi deal. The Saudis could pull out of this Iranian deal anytime, number one. Number two, they could be using this deal with Iran as leverage, saying to Israel and saying to the United States, look, if you don't have our back and if you don't align yourselves with us, then we have no choice but to pivot to the east into the arms of Iran, Russia, and China. So a little bit of political chess, geopolitical chess by the Saudi regime. This is how it is, folks. This is how the game is played on the world stage. That brings us to what's hot once again, an Israeli-Saudi potential deal. Two things before I break down what I think could happen with Iran's reaction to that. Number one, I'm going to take a sip of, now in Philadelphia, where I'm from, we call it water, but the rest of the world seems to call it water. So this is my water, and I have to wet my whistle. Talking for an hour can do that to you. Secondly, we've got a programming note, and mark your calendars for this, folks. Tuesday, September 5th, just 6 days from now, the day after Labor Day, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, September 5th, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Write it down. Make a note on your phone, wherever. On TBN, the rise of artificial intelligence, the rise of AI, my 1 hour special, the rise of AI. Folks, you will not want to miss this. 1 hour straight. Hey, we're talking about the most pressing issues of our day. And about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we got into AI here in the live stream. But I unpacked this, folks, for an hour with tech experts, with pastors. What does it all mean? Everyone is talking about AI right now. I absolutely believe it has a prophetic role to play and prophetic implications, and very likely not in a good way, to say the least. We unpack it all on this 1 hour special, The Rise of AI, Tuesday, September 5th. And folks, the great thing about it is there's so much talk now about AI, the rise of AI, how it impacts all of us. We're coming at it from a Christian perspective, which is really cool and unique, I believe, in that I'm asking, look, what do we do from here as the body of Christ, as the church? How are we to handle AI, which obviously has many sinister, nefarious possibilities? Is there a way? And we're trying to figure this out. Can we use it to further the gospel somehow? We've used social media for all its downfalls. We've used computers, iPhones for all their downfalls to spread the gospel, to advance the kingdom of God. Is there a way we can use AI? I don't know the answer to that yet. I pray that there is, because if there isn't any way that it can be used for good, and there are some ways, think of the maps. Even the Maps app on your phone is a form of AI. So there are things like that. Recommendations on Netflix, things like that. They're rudimentary forms of AI. But the stuff coming down the pike now is absolutely, or does absolutely have sinister potential, no doubt, from rogue regimes, from nefarious actors, the Antichrist, the mark of the beast. We get into this on this 1 hour special, but I could have spent the whole hour saying, run, this is evil. But as believers, I believe as followers of Jesus, we also have to figure out, okay, how do we deal with this? We're not going to be able to hide in a corner from this. This is going to be prevalent and everywhere. So how should we respond as believers? And can we use it for the good of the gospel and the furtherance of the kingdom? Again, folks, I don't know the answer to that. I hope the answer is yes. I don't know the answer. We interview one tech expert. He's excellent. He's a Christian as well. And he's got a really unique perspective on this as well. You got to watch Tuesday, September 5th. I found it fascinating. And folks, I learned so much. Hey, I might be an expert in the Middle East and everything else, but AI and tech, hey, I'm no expert. I'll tell you for sure. I'm calling our tech guys at TBN and saying, hey, help whenever I have a problem, or IT guys. So this was such an eye-opener for me, and I think our guest made it easy to understand. Yes, TBN can be streamed online. Someone asked, you have the TBN app as well, or just tune in on the big screen. I still enjoy watching things on TV, certain things, and that's certainly one of them. I watch a lot of things on my phone too, or tablet, whatever. But still, in my opinion, maybe I'm an old fogey. Nothing like sitting down in front of a nice TV with the family and just watching a good movie or a good show. Maybe I'm old school. I don't know. But check it out, September 5th. Okay, Iran's response. Look, folks, I don't think they're going to take this laying down. And what I mean by that is they're going to be, first and foremost, they are going to slam Saudi Arabia verbally and in the eyes of the world. Think about what happened with the UAE and Bahrain when they signed deals with Israel back in 2020. The Iranian regime slammed them, made some threats as well. I think it might cut deeper with Saudi Arabia. The UAE and Bahrain's one thing. That's an unpardonable, unforgivable sin in the eyes of the Iranian regime to make peace with the Zionist entity, as they call Israel. But I think the Saudis would be another level. And we mentioned it a minute ago, right? I mean, look, Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Islam, the birthplace of Islam's prophet Muhammad, the site of Islam's two holy sites, Mecca and Medina, two holiest sites, I should say. Great symbolism in Saudi Arabia. obviously a player on the world stage, oil rich, energy rich, clearly. The Saudis are a player on the world stage. These aren't just guys in caves. I mean, look, they've got the wealth, they flex their muscle, they've got influence. The Biden administration, for instance, asked them to produce more oil twice in the past year, and the Saudis said, nah, I don't think so. We're not going to produce more oil. We'll keep prices high, gas and oil high. Look, as arguably the leading player in OPEC, the Saudis, kind of have that kind of influence. Hey, real quick, folks, Jim Martin. Jim, thank you so much for your support and for becoming a premium member there. Really appreciate it, Jim. God bless. And premium membership, folks, just go to the homepage and click join and find out more about that. Hey, while you're there, if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. We're almost at 700,000. We're at 688K. Hard to believe. And we're almost at 700,000 subscribers. It's funny. A few weeks ago, I hate to even say it, but we were at 666,000 subscribers. I know. I knew the number was coming, and I wanted to get off it as soon as possible, and we did. Thank God. We were at 667 pretty quickly. But a few commenters, God bless some people, said, we're unsubscribing. You have 666K subscribers. This is an evil site. Folks, what are you going to do? As my mom used to say, hey, there's a number, unfortunately, between 665 and 667. And to get to 667 and continue to grow, we had to, unfortunately, fall on that number for a short time. I didn't intentionally have that number, I promise. But I just say that as an aside because there were a few comments. I shook my head. I said, God bless them. God bless them. But anyway, pretty funny. But what's not funny is what I believe Iran's reaction will be. Now, they slammed the UAE and Bahrain, obviously, verbally, diplomatically, said they're pariah states now. The Saudis, again, influential, a much different level. And I believe Iran's response is going to be unpredictable there with Saudi Arabia. Because remember, folks, there's another piece to this. You might say, well, look, Iran slammed the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco. They criticized them. But it was just barking. They didn't do anything. They made threats. They complained, and nothing happened. Look, the UAE, Bahrain, Israel, it's smooth sailing now, good relationships. Here's the difference. Number one, I think the Saudis, with apologies to the UAE and Bahrain, are much more influential. And number two, Iran and the Saudis have a deal right now. They just came to this diplomatic deal in March, a few months ago. So essentially, the Saudis would be playing both sides of the fence. If you're Iran, you could say that, right? They have a deal with Iran, then they're forging a deal with Iran's greatest enemy. Will Iran keep that Saudi deal if that's the case? It seems to me that Iran would very likely break off relations with Saudi Arabia if the Saudis establish relations with Israel. What do you think of that? Would Iran stick around? I just can't see the Iranian regime with its ideology, death to Israel, genocidal ideology against Israel and the Jewish people, accepting Saudi Arabia, of all nations, the birthplace of Islam, making peace with the so-called Zionist entity, as Iran would call it. I just can't see Iran taking that and saying, okay, Saudi Arabia, we're very disappointed that you did that, but we'll maintain relations with you. Our foreign minister is going to visit Riyadh next week, and your foreign minister can come to Tehran. And we're disappointed, guys, but business as usual. Folks, you and I both know that's not the Iranian regime's MO. What's more likely, and look, not a certainhood, it's not a certainty, but I mean, educated hypothesis, would this be a hypothesis, that there's a good chance that Iran would say, Saudi Arabia, you're a disgrace and we're breaking off diplomatic relations. Certainly a chance. And that gets to the title of this live stream. Would Israel-Saudi peace deal mean war with Iran and its proxies? Folks, look, if Iran were to turn around and break off diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia, things become tense, right? And we haven't had the Houthis attacking Saudi Arabia in a few months now. Iran caught off the wolves. All of a sudden, Iran says to the Houthis, start back up again. Drones, rockets, missiles at Saudi Arabia. And maybe Hezbollah stirs some things up. And we have Hezbollah trainers in Yemen stirring the Houthis up. Folks, that is entirely plausible for Iran to turn around, break that Saudi deal, unleash the Houthi wolves once again, not to mention other forces and perhaps their own, and really make life miserable in a fury, in a rage against Saudi Arabia for the Saudis daring to make peace with Israel. What do you think? I think that's a pretty plausible scenario. Just looking, look, when we're talking about an Israel-Saudi peace deal, we have to consider that there was a piece that really, to be honest with you, sparked my interest about this today, made me think about it in Foreign Policy magazine. Gosh, I thought I had it pulled up, and I don't know that I do on my phone. Apologies, folks. But in Foreign Policy, this was a very interesting piece. I skimmed through it real quick, but the headline caught my eye. They said it definitively. I think there was co-authors to this piece. A Saudi deal with Israel would mean war. Unequivocally, they said it. I'm not saying unequivocally. Perhaps it just comes. Clearly, Iran's not going to be happy. And I think there's a better than good chance that Iran would break off its diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. Perhaps it just stays at that. Iran, in a huff, breaks off relations, recalls its ambassador, slams the Saudis in the media and releases statements calling them traitors to the faith, etc. And it's just that. But others seem to think it might not just be that, and that Iran may take it a step further. And again, considering Iran's track record, I don't think that's beyond the realm of possibility. Do you? And the things broaden and escalate from there. So, folks, very, very interesting, to say the least. And where are we at with this Israel-Saudi peace deal? Now, again, the Biden administration's involvement to me is very unsettling, to say the least. And they want something. They don't want just something. They want a bunch from Israel. Ron Dermer, Israel's strategic affairs minister, visited D.C. last week, met with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. And Blinken basically told him, according to reports, look, don't think you're just going to get peace with Saudi Arabia for nothing. You're going to have to make major concessions. That has been the message delivered by the Biden administration to the government of Benjamin Netanyahu now for months. What does the Biden administration want? The funny thing is, folks, they want a Palestinian state more than the Saudis do. The Saudis, at least MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, is not saying we'll make peace with Israel, but only on the condition of the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now, the king of Saudi Arabia, who's clearly up there in years, he's kind of the old guard, and he's still talking about Palestinian state, nothing without a Palestinian state. Folks, MBS is not thinking that way. What he does want is nuclear power and the ability to start his own nuclear program. How do you feel about that? A nuclear Saudi Arabia. Now, Israel is saying, and Ron Dermer said, that doesn't mean nuclear weapons necessarily. It could just mean a nuclear program, nuclear power. Folks, you know, the Iranian regime used to say the same thing, right? Just nuclear power for peaceful civilian purposes. Now, I'm not saying the Saudis would take that extra step and try to develop the bomb. I'm not saying that. But I am saying if they're looking across the Persian Gulf and Iran is developing the bomb, might it be irresistible for the Saudis? I mean, and we talked about that nuclear arms race. So that could be a big sticking point. The Saudis with nuclear power. The Saudis maybe want defense guarantees from the United States. If we're attacked, you come to our aid, kind of like a Middle Eastern NATO type deal. Could that be on the table? And there's different things. Look, the Temple Mount, which we'll talk about more in a minute. The Saudis might say, we want to replace Jordan, or at least come alongside Jordan as the custodians of the Temple Mount. That would give the Saudis control of obviously Mecca, Medina, and the Temple Mount, the three holiest sites in Islam. So there's a lot to unpack here. But the Biden administration is saying this is our chance to strong arm Israel into a Palestinian state. Now, folks, if Benjamin Netanyahu right now, and by the way, members of his cabinet are saying, no way. It's a very right-wing cabinet, right-wing government. And they're saying, no way. We are not making concessions to get a deal with Saudi Arabia. Sorry. And certainly not a Palestinian state. If Bibi turned around and said, no, we will do whatever it takes to establish an historic peace deal with Saudi Arabia, his government will collapse. I'm telling you right now, members of his cabinet would pull out. And then he would call new elections. And then perhaps, folks, if you play this out, say the government collapses. And look, it's a volatile government right now. There's disagreements amongst members, and the mainstream media has had knives out for this Israeli government since it was sworn in back in late December, January. Obviously, protesters in the streets. So you can't say, although it is a solidly right-wing government, you can't say that it's a rock solid, this is going to be the government for the next 5 years. You can't really say that. And Lipaz Dotan, one of our Israeli viewers, says, hard to say what will happen. I agree. So we don't know. But do we have a scenario where Bibi, look, folks, in interviewing him and in interviewing other Israeli officials, they've said, man, the Saudi deal, that would be the deal. He called it a quantum leap. There's the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco. Then there's Saudi Arabia. And they have said, look, if we strike a peace deal, them, not me, they said this when I interviewed them. You can go back and check it out. Ron Dermer, Bibi, it's all in our archives here. Hey, and while you're there, be sure to subscribe, of course, and click that notification bell. Don't miss any videos here. Every day we're coming to you with updates, mostly every day. But they said, look, if we had peace with the Saudis, it would solve the Israel-Arab conflict. What do they mean by that? Here's what they mean. We'd have peace deals with Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, arguably the four most influential Arab nations. Not to mention Bahrain and Morocco, and we'll see what happens with Sudan. That looks unlikely to me at the moment, a real lasting peace there. That's another story. So Israel says, look, we've got all the major players in the Arab world we'd have normalized relations with other than Iraq and Syria. Syria looks like a no-go, and Iraq looks like a no-go. They're both Iranian satellite states, essentially. So they said, look, that's essentially Arab-Israeli peace. And they made very clear that that doesn't mean peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Just as the Trump administration did when it came up with the Abraham Accords, they put the Palestinians and that issue in a different box. They're saying, hey, this is low-hanging fruit here. Peace deals with Arab nations, that's low-hanging fruit. We can make that happen. We'll deal with the Palestinian issue later. And obviously, a Palestinian state wasn't at the top of the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco's list because they struck the treaties with Israel regardless. So, and I believe it's the same with Saudi Arabia right now as well. But if Bibi says, look, we're going to do whatever it takes for a peace deal with Saudi Arabia, including making painful concessions, what do the other members of his cabinet do? The government collapses, and then what happens? Bibi says, okay, this government collapsed. I'm going to call new elections, and we're going to form a more unity government, meaning elements of the right wing, a centrist party, perhaps Benny Gantz, and a more liberal Yair Lapid. Could it happen? Could they all form a government together? Folks, right now, the knives are out and then some between Lapid and Gantz and Netanyahu. I mean, it's terrible. They don't see eye to eye on practically anything. It's really nasty. So it seems completely unlikely. And yet, in today's Middle East, expect the unexpected. By the way, someone asked, what does BBR, a commenter asked, what does never hold your peace mean at the end of the program? Read Isaiah chapter 62, verse 6. I'll leave it at that because I want you to go read the Bible. Isaiah 62:6, that's what it means. Watchman on the wall, O Jerusalem. You'll see what I mean. But it seems completely unlikely. Bibi, Lapid, Gantz, it'll never happen. Expect the unexpected today. I would never say never in politics, especially Israeli politics, especially in these tumultuous times that we're living in right now. Is it unlikely it would happen? Absolutely. Is it a complete impossibility? You know, you have Lapid and Gantz one day saying, we'd never form a government with Netanyahu. Things have a way of developing, folks. And again, I'm not saying it's going to happen. This right-wing government could be completely united for the next 3 years. We shall see. But this Saudi deal potential, folks, it's going to be something that stirs things up in Bibi's coalition, I believe, because at the end of the day, if the Biden administration is in the middle of this trying to broker it, they want stuff and they want concessions from Israel and they're not going to let go of the Palestinian state issue. I'm telling you, it's going to get very, very interesting. Pray for Israel. Pray for wisdom for Israel's leaders. And I believe the timetable for this, if the Biden administration had its way, would be before the 2024 election. They're looking for a foreign policy feather in their cap. And they believe, man, this is the way to do it. We shall see. Folks, you live in prophetic times. You live in Bible times. You know, people talk about what it was like in Bible times. Well, you're in them right now. These are prophetic times, no doubt. You're watching it unfold before your eyes. People ask, why is today different? We've always had natural disasters and wars and rumors of wars. Yes, we have. I would say a few things why today's different. It seems, man, that they're happening with increased frequency, number one. But number two, the two main reasons, the existence of Israel, once again, the obvious total prophetic signpost, 1948, the miraculous rebirth of the nation of Israel. That's the game changer that sets this generation apart from all other generations prophetically. And number two, technology. We talked about the rise of AI a minute ago, right? Again, September 5th, 8 p.m. on TBN, the rise of artificial intelligence. That's just one example of this game-changing, world-changing technology where a certain leader, and his initials would be AC. I'm not talking about AC Green Lakers fans. I'm talking about the Antichrist, far from it, would have the capability with AI and these different sorts of surveillance technologies to quite literally rule the world and to surveil everyone, unless you can somehow get off the grid still in 2023. I don't even know if it's possible, but could literally have the tools technologically to observe your every move and essentially surveil everything you do. You didn't have that in other generations or other points in history. You have those two things now, the technology for total control and for a complete disappearance of privacy and total surveillance. You've got that. You've got the move towards a digital currency, a cashless society. You've got that. And you've got the miraculous reestablishment of Israel. And you've got Russia, Iran, Turkey aligning like never before. Folks, the prophetic chess pieces are moving on the board. I say all that to say, yes, today is different. And by the way, I name dropped AC Green. You got to have a little humor here once in a while. Does anyone remember AC Green? Any 80s basketball fans out there? And I have to say, God bless him. AC Green, number one, was a Christian, from my understanding, a good, solid guy, a solid believer. And number two, in the 80s, he was sporting a Jerry curl. Yes, he was. And I still remember it as a kid watching those Lakers-Celtics battles and the Lakers battling my Sixers. Anyway, good old days, good old days. We're getting the questions in a minute. I want to quote, though, about this, and keep the questions coming. I saw a question about Eli Cohen and Libya. That's a good question, whoever asked it. I do want to bring up the Temple Mount. And by the way, the Saudis, another piece here I want to quote from, I don't have time. They're talking to the Palestinian Authority now about starting back up funding of Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority. The Saudis want the Palestinians on board with any peace deal with Israel. The Saudis, from a public relations standpoint, folks, don't want the Palestinians. Well, you know Hamas is going to slam them. But they don't want Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority, to slam the Saudis basically as sellouts. So the Saudis basically are trying to buy them off, but they're saying, hey, we'll resume funding you again if you kind of get on board with us normalizing relations with Israel. So interesting how that chess piece is moving as well. So is there a shot that Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, which roundly criticized the Abraham Accords, would not criticize the Saudis over making peace with Israel? The Saudis they're pretty cagey, and they're pretty good chess players, clearly, and they're already laying the groundwork there. But I want to quote from this article from Mordecai Kedar, who's a brilliant thinker and a friend in Israel. I haven't seen him in a bit, but he's a great, great guy. The title of the piece in the Jerusalem Post, you see it, folks. Don't let the Saudis have any role on the Temple Mount. Put Israel in charge. He says the introduction of Saudi Arabia to the Temple Mount will only strengthen the feeling of Muslims that Jews have no connection to Jerusalem and the whole country. I bring this up because, as we said earlier, this is kind of the chatter that the Saudis may have a role in the Temple Mount as part of that Israel-Saudi Arabia peace deal. He also says Jerusalem has been the capital city of Israel for more than 3,000 years, where the temples were. We know that 1,600 years before Islam came into the world, he writes, the temple was the heartbeat of the Jewish people. And would it ever occur, he asked, to Muslims to give up Muslim sovereignty over Mecca and the Kaaba complex in Mecca, their main site of pilgrimage there? And he goes on, I don't have time now to quote from all, I'm going to get to questions, but Jerusalem Post, Mordecai Kedar, again, the title, Don't Let Saudis Have Any Role in the Temple Mount, Put Israel in Charge. What do you think of that? Surely Jordan would not be happy to see the Saudis with a role. Jordan, since 1967, the Islamic Waqf, Jordanian religious authorities have been the main authority atop the Temple Mount. They would not be happy about the Saudis doing that. And what does that mean? How are the Jordanians just ushered out of the picture entirely? Is it the Saudis come alongside them, folks? Fascinating times. Thank God you're here on the Watchman Newscast, because we're going to unpack all of this every single day for you. By the way, if you like to watch me, you like to support this show, you see the cool shirt here. We have a Watchman store right now. We've got some pretty cool merch, T-shirts like you see here, Watchman caps, mugs, hoodies, some good stuff there. shop.tbn.org/Watchman. It's shop.tbn.org/Watchman. Just want to mention that because for years, quite literally, when are you going to have merch? When are you going to start a Watchman store? People are asking. And it's cool because you can show your support for the channel. It's a conversation starter. People say, what's the Watchman? You can tell them about the show. And number two, it helps keep us on the air, folks. I mean, 700,000 subscribers, a weekly TV show on TBN. It's not free, unfortunately. We need, funds to keep it going. So any bit of support helps, and we appreciate it very much. And hey, my 12-year-old and my 16-year-old said it looks good. So they are the authorities when it comes to gear these days. And I'm happy with how it turned out. Questions? Let's do it. Okay, we've got over 2,000 people with us. Is that all? Great to have you with us from around the world. Shout out to everyone. Let me pull up these questions, folks. And let's do this the right way. I don't know if there's any wrong way to take the questions. I don't know why I just said that, but let's see. Give me 1 second. Pardon me. Thank you for your patience as I pull up the application that I need where your questions are coming through. I know they're brilliant. We have a highly educated audience here. Got it. And this is really a treat for me to do questions with you every week, okay? That's my fault for not having it pulled up right away, but it's coming. I promise. I promise. This is called filling dead air on TV, by the way. I remember I was hosting a show in Jerusalem back in, 2011 on the beach in Caesarea. Not a bad gig, right, to host a show there. And the show, I guess we were a minute short. The show was ending. And it was basically, we kind of wrapped a minute early. And that was one of the first, I really had to think on my feet, needless to say, and fill that time. And I pulled it off somehow by the grace of God. So, but yeah, sometimes on TV it gets like that. This was unexpected. I should have had this app pulled up with your questions. It's moving at a snail's pace, but it's coming. And here it is. Okay, got it. Sorry about that, ladies and gents. And we have the questions. My apologies. Thank you for your patience. Okay. Good question. USMC, Semper Fi, USMC Campbell. Thank you for your service to our country, sir, or ma'am. I'm not sure. But if Saudi Arabia had the Temple Mount, do you think they'd allow other religions to pray on top of the mount? Yes, I believe there's a very good possibility. I wouldn't say definitively. I would say a tentative yes. I think the Saudis see themselves, and Mohammed bin Salman sees himself as bringing people together and bringing religions together. You're seeing this in the UAE right now. So I think there's a good possibility that, yeah. And I think Israel may even demand that. So I think there would be a good possibility that Jews and Christians who are not permitted to pray atop the Temple Mount right now. That's where that question derives from. We talked about this last week. People were shocked to hear it. Yes, folks, you heard it right. Jews and Christians cannot pray atop the Temple Mount, the holiest site in Judaism, where both Jewish temples once stood. The Ark of the Covenant was inside the first temple, Solomon's temple, which means God's divine presence once dwelt there. Clearly for Christians, you have not only what happened there in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, Jesus, as the Gospels lay out, taught inside the second temple, chased out the money changers there, spent time there as a 12-year-old boy, teaching the teachers. So needless to say, great significance for Christians and Jews, no doubt, yet they're not allowed to pray there under these Muslim authorities. If a Christian or a Jew openly prays upon top of Temple Mount, they'll be either arrested or escorted off. So it's called the status quo. I don't think it's a very fair status quo, to say the least. The Jewish people are saying right now in greater numbers, hey, wait a minute, 3,000 years ago, again, over 1,000 years before Islam even existed, our ancestors prayed here, and now we can't. And we control Jerusalem. We reunited it in 1967, and you're telling us we can't pray atop our holiest site, which sits smack dab in the middle of Jerusalem? There's a lot of outrage over that, and that's a great question. Will the Saudis be amenable to those Israeli requests? You may see it all go down, folks, very soon. Very, very interesting. Okay, great question there. Okay. Let's see. Question, will we know when the peace deal is signed between Saudi Arabia and Israel? Oh, yeah. I think without a doubt, Israel will have a lot of problems keeping that under wraps. I think Israel's been talking about it so much that if it's such a game changer for Israel, yes, I think Israel absolutely would demand that it go public, no doubt. Along those lines, Denver Johnson, a premium member, thank you, Denver, asks, hello, Eric. Do you think Eli Cohen, Israel's foreign minister, made a premature mistake announcing Israel's ties with Libya? It could have been done quietly and covertly. What are your thoughts? Denver, this is a tough one because Eli Cohen's office says, hey, we got the thumbs up. We got the okay from the Libyans to publicize the meeting. That's their version. That's their story. They're sticking to it. The Libyans say, no, that's not what happened. The bottom line is it kind of caused a diplomatic disaster. The Libyan foreign minister who met with Eli Cohen in Italy was fired. She had to flee the country for her safety. We covered this on the newscast earlier this week. Pray God's protection over this poor woman. But Eli Cohen said, we got the green light. Look, I interviewed Eli Cohen back in February. Solid guy, smart guy. I don't think he's a complete amateur. He doesn't have a long diplomatic background necessarily, but look, common sense, I think he would know better than to do that. So I'm not sure quite what happened here. Maybe Israel did underestimate the fury on the street among the Libyan public, which is many of them are very anti-Israel. And the country's divided right now. It's basically a country in two halves, two competing halves, East and West in Libya, since the Arab Spring, which quickly devolved into an Islamist winter, as we know. In the post-Gaddafi era, Libya has been a complete mess, I hate to say it, and basically split. So perhaps the Libyan delegation and Israel underestimated what the reaction would be in Libya. I don't know, but it's unfortunate that this happened. And the prayer is that it doesn't affect Israel's potential relations with other Arab nations. Are they going to be gun shy now and say, wow, did you see what happened in Libya? Sorry, let's put the Israel negotiations on ice. We don't know. I don't think that would happen with Saudi Arabia. I think that ship is far down the river, so to speak, if that's a saying. But that was an unfortunate incident this week for sure. But Eli Cohen is a good guy. He's a smart guy. So I don't think he would just recklessly and haphazardly announce something without the Libyan, at least that Libyan delegation he met with, without their approval. So, okay, good question there, Denver. Okay, let's see. Man, oh man, good question. Naomi Scroggins asks, is there any update on the tent situation in Israel? Is it still there, or has Israel taken steps to remove it? Naomi, I'm so glad you asked because I wanted to get into this a little bit. I'm running out of time, but to my knowledge, the Hezbollah tent, one of them is indeed still there on the Israeli side of the Israel-Lebanon border. I do not believe that second tent has been taken down. Quick refresher, there were 2 tents that Hezbollah set up on the Israeli side of the Israel-Lebanon border, manned by Hezbollah operatives. In Israel, they would call that chutzpah. Unbelievable that on Israeli sovereign territory, Hezbollah operatives literally crossed the border and set up 2 military tents. Unreal. Israel, I'm sure through back channels, threatened them and said, hey, you better move those tents. They did take one down, but to my knowledge, the second is still there. And Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, is saying, Israel, we dare you. We're not touching that tent. We're leaving it there. We dare you to do something about it. That was the situation. I do not believe that tent has been taken down. I may be mistaken, but folks, I have not heard anything about that second tent being taken down, which means you still have a Hezbollah presence on sovereign Israeli territory, which to me is mind-boggling. And I'm a bit shocked that Israel has not taken action in some form or fashion. And you might say, it's only a tent, who cares? But folks, for Hezbollah, great symbolism there. They're saying, look, we challenged the Zionist entity. We even set up a tent on their territory, and they didn't do anything about it. They're scared of us. So, look, in the Middle East, symbolism, semantics, all these things, they all add up. It's everything. So, great question there, and we're keeping an eye on that tent. Would you believe that tent may spark, it's not an understatement to say that tent could spark a regional war. If Israel moves in and moves against that tent, Hezbollah has vowed to respond. It's already a tinderbox with Hezbollah and Israel. Could things spiral out of control over a tent? Yes, they could. Welcome to the Middle East. Okay. Another question here. Let's see. Wow, man, a lot of good questions. Man, you guys are smart. Let's see. Wise. I should say wise. This is a good one, and this is very relevant for everyone watching. Miriam Splashes Paint asks, Erick Stakelbeck, the Watchman, a fun one with your water, as we call it in Philadelphia, my hometown. What is your favorite Philly sandwich, hoagie, or Philly cheesesteak ingredients? Hey, I'm giving them a shout out here. If you're ever in Philadelphia, my favorite Philly cheesesteak is Steve's Prince of Steaks. Steve's Prince of Steaks. Where I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia, Steve's Prince of Steaks. For my money, best cheesesteak in Philadelphia. I also love Tony Luke's, which is pretty famous. But Steve's I love. I do. There's another place in Roxborough called Delisandro's, another great cheesesteak. There's so many, folks. Hey, it's no surprise that when I initially left Philadelphia, I moved to the D.C. area 17 years ago. I lost about 10 pounds right away. None of the cheesesteaks, none of the Italian food, none of the tasty cakes in Philly in my hometown, but great food, comfort food for sure. And man, I've eaten so many cheese. As a young guy, I'd eat a cheesesteak, and I'd go out 10 minutes later and play full court basketball. To be young again. But anyway, thanks so much for joining us, folks, here today. It was great. It was fun too, right? We dropped some humor in among some very serious issues, but always fun to be with you here live. And I will be with you here tomorrow as well. You've been warned. Pray for everyone in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina right now, please, as this hurricane's bearing down on them. Thanks so much for joining us today. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, Isaiah 62:6, never hold your peace.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching.